All right. Hi, welcome back to another episode of the Big Purple Blob. Today we're here with Ashley Olivine. So I'm really excited to talk to Ashley because she has lived the overseas life, wealth of experience, and all sorts of learning and education. Like, Ashley, do you want to introduce yourself and tell us some of you have like a long list of qualifications and educational achievements, right?
Yeah, so I'm a health psychologist, and what that means is I basically just focus on the connection between mind and body. And everything's intertwined. We couldn't live without either one, our mind or our body, and they interact in everything we do. So that's kind of my focus. And then I have some specializations, stress, sleep, child development, maternal health, things like that.
Awesome. Um, this I Your a few specializations, stress, sleep, maternal health, like these just one of these is like awesome to have awareness and support around. So I'm impressed that you have all of these categories. Um, so Ashley, can you start off by just telling us kind of how you started on this path of of knowing what you wanted to, what work you wanted to do and what you wanted to put into the world. And did you do this before you were an overseas?
Okay, so first let's be clear. I had no clue what I wanted to do. I was just like, well, whatever, let's figure it out as we go. I had some ideas and some interests and some things that definitely did not work out and some things that I decided that I hated. I actually started out in the corporate world. So it's like it's been a progression. Um, and yeah, I started working um, in this capacity, like the coaching capacity online prior to moving overseas. I started, actually, I believe I was pregnant with my first daughter when um, I switched everything online. We moved across the country, still in the US, but across the country. And I was working in the clinical setting at that point. But obviously I wasn't going to be able to commute across the country. So I moved everything online and I knew I was having a little one. So I kind of wanted to put everything online for that reason as well. So it kind of worked out that way. And then now that I'm online, I can take it wherever I go. But as far as my current specializations, it was just a bunch of life and research, and everything happened and it transitioned. And that's actually why I have so many specializations, is because I started in one place and then realized that I needed more, and then got a little obsessed and carried away and had to know all of the things. um, so I actually got really, really sick, and um, I was going through all the traditional avenues of trying to get everything figured out medically. Um, and it was a huge process. We're talking like multiple years. And it just didn't work out. I went through the modern medicine world, and at the end, they said, okay, well, we know what's wrong with you, but we can't fix you. So you're just going to have to be sick for the rest of your life. And I wasn't okay with that. I didn't want to live like that. So I did a lot of research and ended up healing more naturally. And I'm not sick anymore. But along that journey, I had to learn so many different things. And that's kind of what brought me to the health psychology point, is because it took mind and body healing. And then I realized other people needed this too. And so I started out in sleep, but it wasn't just about sleep. Everyone I was working with for sleep, their real problem wasn't sleep. I was treating their insomnia, but they had insomnia caused by something else. It was stress, it was life, it was all the other things. So I ended up um, treating everything else to get the sleep to resolve.
Amazing. Okay, I love that you did this because as you were talking, I was thinking like, well, do those of us going through this need to like pursue our own degree and become our own psychologists? Like how like you had to solve your
Please
own
don't do that.
issues, right? But that's why this is amazing because you are that person now to for
Yeah.
someone struggling to reach out to say what is happening with me. I know there's something wrong. I haven't been able to find solutions with traditional medicine, and
Hmm.
I know there's like this mind body element here. I know it's something connected,
Hmm.
and how do I figure this out? And now that you are a professional in the world, that there are people providing this service, there's someone for those seeking that to talk to say,
Hmm.
I've been through this, let's figure this out. And it's not just sleep. I find that too in people that I work with and for myself, like the one issue that's the symptom showing up, we all think, why can't I solve this one issue? If I could figure that out, it would be better. But of course, there's other things happening in our life. It's all intertwined. So
Hmm.
being able to have a space to talk about that and look at it and figure out the other stuff, which then resolves the one symptom that I wanted to fix in the first place, is so
Yeah.
useful, right?
So there's definitely a much easier way to do it than the way that I did it. And things have come a long way. We're talking years ago that all of this happened. This was like 8 years ago. So the whole landscape has changed a lot since then. We've learned a lot. And a lot of the things that I was just discovering fresh back then is more mainstream now. So no, you don't have to go through this whole process, and you can just, skip all of that and get some support and move forward. But back then I couldn't find it. It was a lot fresher. And one of the things I ran into is that it started with pregnancy with my first, and I was getting a lot of, well, you're supposed to feel terrible when you're pregnant. And then it carried into postpartum, and it was, well, you're supposed to feel terrible during postpartum and when you have a small child. And instead of getting better, I was getting worse. So I kept waiting for this magical moment when my kid was sleeping through the night, because you have to feed a newborn, you're awake in the night and you're tired. But that wasn't it. And then I just got worse and worse. And then it became very obvious that it wasn't just being a mom. So the big thing that hit me was, if my severe chronic illness could be masked by motherhood, that means moms are suffering all the time. And this is just considered normal. Like, these debilitating symptoms I was experiencing were considered normal. And that's not okay, because it's very much not normal. And then what I realized is that you can be pregnant and have a baby and go through postpartum, and your kid growing up and not experience all of those things, and you can feel good. And or obviously you're going to have some phases of feeling less good.
Right.
But when I had my next kid, um I felt better throughout the entire time than I did on my best days before.
Wow.
So it was just
Yeah,
crazy to me that it could be considered normal.
I think that's so true. And for so many of us, it's when something comes up for us as humans, right? There's like a situation where maybe we have a cold or we're not feeling great or something. We're waiting until the end point, right? We're like, well, this cold will be over in 4 days, or when is this feeling of unsettled or stress or anxiety going to go away? And I think, especially for those of us who move all the time, we're associating it with different phases of our life. Like, well, we've just arrived, so it's normal for me to be anxious. I don't know where to go. I don't know how to get around. I don't know the language, or, are moving soon. So I'm worried about that. And that's why this is coming up. And we're waiting for the end point. And I think the big difference is recognizing maybe there's not an end point. Maybe I don't just wait this out, right? Maybe that's not the end. My pregnancy's over now. I should go back to feeling normal, or, you know, my
Mhm.
baby is not an infant anymore. Now I'm certainly going to feel normal again. Noticing the difference when things aren't going away, and especially like you said, things are getting worse. And I think
Mhm.
some of us have that tendency to just wait and hold on. Like, well, maybe next year it'll get better. Maybe when we move, it'll get better. Maybe once my kids are in school. And I talk to people who have spent years waiting to feel better.
Yeah, you can't just wait until retirement to feel better, because then you've wasted basically your entire life of just waiting. But that's not to say that the transition isn't hard, or there aren't hard phases or hard days or hard moments
Mhm.
within that transition. But it also doesn't mean that you can't enjoy part of that, and or all of it. And, instead of saying, well, what's hard about this and how can I get through this? What about asking, how can I make the most of this? Or how can I enjoy this? Or what part of this can I appreciate today or
Mhm.
in this moment? It doesn't even have to be all day. It can just be in the next 30 seconds. What can I enjoy? Because sometimes the whole day it's a pretty crazy day and you're having a hard time and the movers are coming and whatever else is happening, someone's throwing up because there's always a bodily fluid issue. But in this moment, everything's okay. And what am I excited about?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's so true. And it's recognizing that we have the ability to have stress in our life, that we're not going to fix or find some situation in which everything is going smoothly and perfectly all the time. And yeah, none of our kids are contracting a stomach flu. Like, these things are going to happen in our life. And so how can we get to a place for ourselves of being able to enjoy our life and recognize that there are bumps and challenges along the way? Some will be huge hurdles, not a bump, and some will be small roadblocks. And, how do we look at things and decide what we're going to get through and what we can be appreciative for in that moment, too?
Yeah, and the other thing is it's really important to distinguish between stressors and stress, because a stressor is a stressful situation. It's something that happens that can be stressful, but someone else can look at that same situation and not feel stressed about it.
Mhm.
Or the same person, I could have one situation and I could either have a stress response or not have that stress response. I could be completely calm with that event, with that situation that's happening,
Mhm.
or I could lose my mind and go completely nuts. So, I might go off on a tangent here, but I
Go
promise
for
it's
it.
related.
I like where we're
Um,
going.
Okay, so there's the scale of stressful life events. And you may not have heard of this specific scale and how it works, but everyone kind of knows the general idea, or maybe you don't, that you can have a whole bunch of stressful life events, and then you're more likely to get sick and have chronic illness and basically die earlier than you would if you didn't have stressful life events. And these are things like death of a child, or just anything like money troubles and loss of job or divorce. All of those stressful life events make it more likely that you are going to get a cold or suffer chronic illness or not recover from an injury or have trouble recovering from a chronic illness. And then it shortens life expectancy. But there's the other side of it, that if you can learn how to manage that stress, then you can still live long. And there's a theory that you could actually live longer. So I've been obsessing over longevity research lately.
Oh, wow.
And you look at those pockets of people who live longer than the average person, like into their hundreds. And a lot of them have experienced trauma and severe hardships, like starving to death and then surviving, or living through war and then surviving. And now they're living past 100 years old. And they've found ways to cope. They have found ways to live in that stressful situation, but not have it elevate their stress level.
Hmm.
Or when it does elevate, then they lower it. And so it's not necessarily about what stressors are we experiencing, it's how we're living life. So, um, one person could be living through some horrendous stressors and be completely relaxed. And then they go visit their friend who has, to what they're
Mhm.
experiencing, like a completely stress-free life, because their stressors are um, way smaller in comparison, but that person is a total ball of stress.
Mhm.
And this is related to, overseas life, because you have a bunch of people who are living overseas, away from extended family, away from friends, moving to new places, not necessarily knowing the language, trying to put kids into schools in a foreign country, and all of the ridiculously stressful things that are stressful events. And then there are a bunch of people who live in their hometown their entire life, and they have the support of family, and they have all of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean that one is more stressful than the other because of those situations, because plenty of people live in the same place their entire life and still experience stress,
Right.
or don't have financial problems and still experience stress. So when we are worried about how stressful it is to move overseas and try to, you know, maintain a career or take care of kids in a foreign country, we have to just step back and remember that that doesn't mean we have to be stressed.
Yeah.
Stress is a choice, and sometimes it happens involuntarily because we don't know how, but we can still learn.
Mhm. Yes, I think that's so true, and we can look around and see that everyone's individual experience, right? We probably all have friends who we've seen move and they're really carefree about it. Like, oh yeah, I'm moving, no big deal. It's and then other people who are absolutely stressed out by that. I think of so many things, or just like fear of flying is one that people
Mhm.
think of, or fear of heights, right? These things are sort of in like an acceptable category with a specific name of this is something some people have. You have this fear of flying, and you can recognize that not everyone has it, but if you have it, you can claim that and say this is a fear that I have, and there's a label for it and all of that. And then we have these other fears and anxieties that come up for us specifically that we don't have a name for, that we don't have fear of moving or fear of um,
PCS phobia.
right, like fear of communicating in the language you have no idea how to speak, like fear of getting in the cab when you don't know where you're going, those kinds of things. So we don't
Mhm.
have labels for that. And then we think we can judge ourselves and think it's wrong. Like this, my fear is wrong because someone else doesn't have the same fear that I have. Um, or to, you and I can take the same test and one of us could stress out about it and one of us could take it easy. And it has nothing to do with the
Mhm.
outcome, like who's getting an A and who's getting a
Mhm.
D on the test, but it's just our own level of stress. And that's why I think talking to someone else, having, if you have a good friend in your life that you can discuss these things and just check in with yourself all the time. What's my level of stress related to this situation that I'm in now? Or what is my, level of depression that I'm in right now? And is this matching the situation that I'm in? Does this feel okay for right now? Do I need to get out of it? Where am I at? Or having a therapist that you talk to. All of us need to be checking in with our
Mhm.
with what we're with our emotions and where we
Yeah.
are. Um, I
So
think.
community is definitely huge. I completely agree. And having that support, and sometimes in some phases, in some situations, for some people, the community support of family and friends is enough. And sometimes we just need that outside support system,
Mhm.
and there's no right or wrong. But the other thing you were talking about, different people being stressed over different things, totally, totally true. And the same person can be stressed versus not stressed over the same situations in different times.
Yeah.
So, we may have 10 moves, and maybe 5 of them were a complete disaster where we were super stressed. And the other 5 of them were like, whatever, it doesn't matter. Or, we're okay. So it's just kind of like looking at what was different. And a lot of times it's the attitude we take into it,
Mhm.
and our expectations, and how our expectations are measuring up to reality, and what we're making that mean, and what thoughts we have about that, as opposed to just, because you can be conscious about it,
Mhm.
and then you can just let it go. And it seems like a lot of times when we just let it go its own course, that is when we tend to get more stressed, because we're not taking a step back and saying, okay, big scheme of things, this is okay. My stuff is probably actually going to make it to that next country. Maybe some stuff is going to be left in the storage unit when it wasn't supposed to be, but it'll be all right. We'll figure it out.
Mhm.
And sometimes it takes checking in, like you said, with a friend or with yourself, and or just having a sign on the wall that says, check in with yourself and see if this is a big deal, or see if you're going to live through it.
Yes. Yeah, and I think so much, I mean, you said 8 years ago when you started down that path, um, which is it to me is not so long ago, but I think we have learned so much. You said attitude is can play a role, and I think that's what we're starting to understand more and more now as technology develops and we are able to look at the like neurotransmitters in our brain, and
Mhm.
we're able to understand these stress responses and why we eat and why we have certain emotions and how it's all connected to what we are thinking.
Mhm.
Right. And if it's an event that happened that we aren't aware of, as long as we're not thinking about it, it's not affecting us. Something terrible, this awful crisis could have happened within our family. And if we don't know that that event has taken place, we are feeling fine and healthy and well. And so it really is how our brain is taking in that information, which starts creating so many stress responses in our body. So I
Mhm.
think, now that we have this awareness, and I think you and I are reading the same book, you recommended The Choice, speaking about longevity and that book, how you can go through a seriously traumatic experience and what you are thinking and your attitude and how you react to that experience are all pieces that we're putting together now, not just like that experience happened to you and so therefore you have this trauma living in your body for the rest of your life now, but we're
Mhm.
starting to understand how we decide to react to the stressful experiences that we are having, whether they're on the
Mhm.
grand scale of trauma or the small scale of trauma. Um,
Yeah, yeah. So just to kind of like give you an idea of the timeline, it was about 8 years ago that I got sick, but I started in this work over a decade ago.
mhm,
So by the time I got sick, I had already seen patterns in clients, and I was already familiar with all of this. And it still took me like 3 years to figure it out.
mhm,
So I'm not saying the way you look at it and the way you approach it and your thinking and catching this, it's not easy and it doesn't come naturally. So if you're sitting there thinking, well, I've been sick for 15 years, what does that say about me? It says nothing about you because everyone's timeline is different. And yeah, you're right about, someone that we care about can get in a horrible accident and we don't know it yet, so we don't have that response to it. And it is our knowledge of it and becoming aware of it and then having thoughts about it, and then that kind of transitions into our body. And you can have the heart rate speeding up, you can have difficulty breathing, all kinds of responses to it. But yeah, it does go back to how you process it and what thoughts and attitudes you take into it. And yeah, that book, it got to me. I really
Yes.
like that book because she puts it into perspective of the survivor thing. Do you have I forget the author. Do you have it in front
I'm
of you?
looking it up now. Is her
You can
name
look it up too.
Edith?
Edith Eger.
Uh, yeah, Edith Eva Eger. Dr. Edith.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, she's a Holocaust survivor, and she talks about just her thinking as she goes through that recovery phase, and she recounts her story. And it's very eye-opening with how she can go through such horrendous trauma in a very pivotal point in her life. She was a teenager in during the Holocaust, and she was in a concentration camp as a teenager.
Mhm.
And we think about what were we doing as teenagers, and it wasn't living through a war in a
Right.
concentration camp. So then she takes that and she made an entire life for herself. She had kids, and she just learned so much about thinking, and then she shares it in her book. So it's a
Mhm.
good read.
Yes, so good. And she also carries that trauma. Like she does the thing that we all do, which is like, if I don't talk about it and I don't think about that terrible time in my life, then maybe it won't affect me and I can go on living. I can just enjoy my life, and tries to put it away. And I think, and she's writing this book now later in life as I
Mhm.
realize it's time for me to process this. And to your point of like holding on to sickness for 50, or not holding on to sickness, but experiencing sickness for 15 years, right? We do that and we live through things, and we carry our trauma with us, and without any judgment being able to realize like, okay, I've been struggling with this for 10 years or 12 years, and now I'm going to talk to a therapist and I'm going to look at it,
Mhm.
and just realizing that we have the opportunity to do that in our life. And you can call up Ashley and
Mhm.
talk to her about it, so that there's space for someone to listen to what you're going through, and for you to process and learn and grow.
Yeah, and there's no judgment because we are all on our own journey.
Yeah.
And when we talk about what's your thoughts going into it and your attitude, that doesn't mean like put on a smile and have a positive attitude at all costs and pretend that everything's rainbows and butterflies when it's not. But that means thinking about what you're thinking about, and does this serve me, and is this getting me where I want to go? And you can change those thoughts, and when you change those thoughts, you can change the way you react to those thoughts, and you could change your behaviors, and then when you change your behaviors, you get a different result. So yeah, you can consciously do that, and then there will be days when no matter how hard you try, it's going to creep in. And it's a process. It's not like oh, I physically healed and I worked on my mind and now everything's perfect, because I still go through those days where I'm like, what is going on today?
Right. Yes, exactly. That's what I think we're here as the big purple blob, being experts and having a lot of knowledge and wisdom, but also being honest about struggling, from day to day and having our own challenges that we are still facing and not achieving any level of perfection. Um, so just as we wrap up, so can you tell us, you did all of this as a military spouse. How did you find time to do this? How are you doing this now with two young kids? What does your work look like? How can people reach you? 16 questions to wrap
Yeah.
up.
Okay. Let me know if I miss any of these. So how did I find time? I decided that it was not an option for me. And I needed an outlet. I needed to have a passion and a purpose, and I needed to go after that. And it was like this burning desire that I couldn't ignore. And what I find is that when I am doing things that are aligned with what I really want to be doing, it's not work and I enjoy it and it's energizing. It's not like this stuff drains me. I can, go through research for a couple hours and then I come out and I'm like, look what I learned, look what I found. And I'm like so excited. I don't need to take a nap. This is super exciting and energizing for me. So it doesn't feel like work. It doesn't feel draining. It doesn't feel like an obligation. It feels like something that I want to do. And then I learned how to say no to stuff that didn't really matter to me. I first of all figured out what I cared about and what I didn't care about. And the stuff that I didn't care about, I just let it go,
Mhm.
and didn't do it and said no. And I had to drop this whole I should be doing this because I'm a mother or because whatever reason we tell ourselves. No, you shouldn't do anything just because society says you should do it. So it's a lot of picking and choosing and deciding what's best. And sometimes there are two very good options and you want to do both. And you have to say, okay, but which one's better? Like, which one do I prefer? And which one do I prefer now versus down the road? Because a lot of times you have that short-term gratification versus long-term joy. And a lot of times you have to say no to that short-term fear of missing out in order to have that more long-term what you really want. So it was a lot of conversations with myself about, okay, this looks good now, but what do I really want big picture? So that was part of it. But also I was really sick and really desperate. And I was ready to do anything. Like it didn't matter. I was going to do it. That didn't mean it was easy. I still had to work with myself on it and figure it out and talk myself into it and manage my mind. But there was going to be nothing standing in my way of getting better because I was just not okay with being miserable for the rest of my life.
Mhm.
So I hit that point where there was no other option. And then once I started feeling good, I knew that I had to help other people make the most out of their lives, whether they were sick or not. It doesn't matter if you're sick or not. We all have our own hardships, and it's what we do with those that makes a difference. So that was part of it. And then, just knowing that, okay, everybody's capable of more than we think we're capable of. And when we start stretching that muscle, like when I first started taking classes as, well, I guess I never really, I think I was taking classes before so I went to college and then I took a break and I was working in corporate. And then there was just a whole lot of life. But then I decided to go back to school. And I guess it was before my first daughter that I started going back to school. But when she was little, I had these stories of, well, I can't take classes, or maybe I can take one class at a time because I have a baby and I'm working. And how can I take full-time classes with a baby while working? It's just not possible. But then I started like challenging myself, like, well, what could I do? And then I started adding classes and adding classes. And I realized, hey, guess what? I actually can do this. And then I started, I was full time. And then I decided, well, maybe I can do a little more. And so I got waivers to go above full time to like, I
Yeah,
ended up
extra credit
like
hours per semester. You have to get a waiver to take more than
yeah,
23 hours. Yeah.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
So I was like doubling up. And then I was like, oh, well, maybe I can triple up. And
Wow.
so I ended up doing more. And then when they said, okay, you've got to the point where you can't get any more waivers, you have to go back down to like regular full time because you've hit this phase in the program where you can't do extra anymore. No more waivers, you're done. And I was
Mhm.
like, well, this is easy. Whereas before, when full time was hard when I first started full time, but when I went up higher and then went back to full time, it was so easy. I was like, what else can I do? I'm kind of bored. So it's all a matter of like perspective and what you're used to and what you're comparing it to. So um, if you are used to doing just a little bit, then a little more is going to be hard. But if you're used to doing a lot, then the normal amount is not going to feel hard.
Mhm.
So my point here is that we can stretch that muscle and we can grow. And it's like learning how to run longer distances. It's the same idea. It's like when you're training for a marathon, you start at those low mileage and then you creep up and you creep up and you creep up. And it's really exhausting for a while. But then you get there and all of a sudden a 10-mile run seems like nothing.
Mhm.
So it's the same idea with anything you want to do in life.
So good. Oh, that's so impressive to hear because just that idea makes it more believable. Like, oh, I could do this class load because I wouldn't be doing double like Ashley did. But now it sounds much more reasonable. Like, I could have a little kid and take classes online. Suddenly that seems more available. So I'm
It's
glad you shared
totally
that.
possible. Yeah, you just have to find a way and you have to ask yourself, how can I make this work instead of our initial, which was, I'm no different. Like my
Yeah,
initial was like, this is impossible.
right.
Anyone who thinks this is possible is completely crazy. This is not possible.
Yeah, definitely not possible. Right. That's our first reaction to everything.
Hmm.
It's just
Yeah.
the idea of maybe I could start it a little bit.
Hmm. Yeah.
So how can clients work with you if anyone wants to talk with you? How do we find you?
So I am the only Ashley Olivine. So it makes it easy. You don't have to search very hard. My website is ashleyolivine.com. I'm on social media. You can reach out. Um, you can link my email address. I'm sure you have show notes, right?
Yes, we will put the
Yeah.
link in the show notes for sure. And yes, just so glad to talk to you. Thank you for sharing your story of inspiration to anyone out there wondering if they can follow their passion or if they want to talk to someone or if maybe the way that they're feeling right now in life doesn't feel like it's working for you and nothing has is changing. If you want to create some change and find something new, talk to Ashley or reach out to someone, see what you can change in your life today.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed our chat.
Thank you for listening to the Big Purple Blob Morning Show. It has been a pleasure to share our stories with you today. Now we want to hear from you. Tell us your story. Let us know your biggest challenge that you face at Post or back in the States. We also want to know what type of parenting support you need at this time. To connect with us, visit our website at thebigpurpleblob.com. If you found today's episode helpful, please share with your friends in the American Mission community. And remember, we want to hear from you because we are here for you.